The building was empty at 4:47 in the morning. That was when DeShawn Carter preferred it. The floors still damp from the mop, the lobby lights on their overnight dim, the whole city outside still deciding whether to wake up. He had been cleaning this building for 7 months, and he knew every floor the way you knew a place you moved through in the dark. Not by sight, by feel. The particular catch in the elevator door on floor 9. The supply closet on 14 that stuck if the temperature dropped. The executive suite on 16 where the CEO sometimes worked past midnight and where he had learned, in 7 months, not to knock. She didn't speak to him. She had never spoken to him. He had learned this in the first week from the building's day staff, who said it with the shrug of institutional memory. She doesn't talk to the cleaning crew. That's just how she is. He had accepted it because he needed the job, and because Marcus needed school clothes, and because the overnight shift paid a differential, and because some truths about a workplace you simply learned and moved on from. He had learned other things in the first week that were more useful than the non-acknowledgement policy. He had learned which of the other overnight crew members were reliable. Pete's recommendation had been accurate. The 2 men who worked the lower floors were competent and quiet, and did their jobs without complication. He had learned that the building's facilities manager, Lorraine, came in at 6:30 every morning, and that the overlap with the end of the overnight shift was a useful 30 minutes for addressing any issues that had developed. He had learned that the tech startup on 4 left protein bar wrappers on top of the recycling bin instead of in it. A pattern he had addressed silently by placing a second bin directly under the first one, so the overflow fell in rather than on the floor. He had learned that the executive suite on 16 had a specific acoustic quality in the hours after midnight, that the building's fax cycling, which was loud on the lower floors, was nearly inaudible up there, and the floor had a quality of stillness that was different from the lower floor's quiet. He had learned that the CEO worked in that stillness the way certain people worked in silence. Not because the silence was comfortable, but because it was honest about what it was. It was late. The building was empty. She was working anyway. He had thought about that sometimes, about the choice to keep working in an empty building at 1 in the morning. He had made a version of that choice for 7 months. Arriving at 11, moving through floors that the day workers would occupy in 9 hours. Doing the work that made those floors possible without being seen doing it. There was something that he had come to find, surprisingly, restorative about it. The job didn't ask him to perform. It asked him to work. And the specific period of his life when performing was what he had the least capacity for. That distinction mattered. And because the overnight shift paid a differential, and because some truths about a workplace you simply learned and moved on from. He was mopping the executive suite corridor at 4:47 in the morning when he heard the sound. Not a sound that belonged in an empty building, not the settling of old steel, not the HVAC cycling on. Something else. He put down the mop. If someone you almost overlooked turned out to be exactly who you needed, drop a heart and tell me your city. DeShawn Carter had been an MT for 6 years before he became a janitor. This was not a story he told at parties. He didn't go to parties. He was a single father of an 8-year-old, and his social life had the specific shape of a life organized entirely around a child's schedule and a night shift that started at 11 and ended at 7. He told it when asked, which was not often, and when he told it simply. His wife Keisha died 6 months ago from a heart condition that hadn't been diagnosed, because the symptoms had presented as anxiety, and she was 31, and Black in the ER had sent her home twice. He had been a working EMT when she died, had been in the field when the call came in, had driven his own ambulance to the hospital where she was already gone when he arrived. He had worked for 4 more months after Keisha died, because stopping required a decision he couldn't make yet, and going to work required no decision at all. Then he had made the decision. He had taken Marcus to his mother's in Aurora, and he had driven to the foothills and sat in his car looking at the mountains, and he had thought, with the specific clarity of someone who has run out of deferral, I cannot go to the scene of a cardiac emergency again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He had driven back to Denver. He had enrolled Marcus back in his school. He had found the overnight cleaning job because it paid $18 an hour with the night differential, and because no one had cardiac emergencies in empty office buildings at 2 in the morning. The building was 1600 Glenarm Place, a 22-story commercial tower in the heart of downtown Denver. Cross Capital Partners occupied the top 3 floors. The rest was a mix of law firms, financial services companies, and a tech startup on the 4th floor that kept strange hours and left behind an extraordinary quantity of energy drink cans. DeShawn cleaned floors 9 through 16 on weeknights, rotating through the building's 16-floor cleaning schedule with 2 other overnight crew members who handled the lower floors. He started at 11, worked through the night in the specific rhythm of the job, vacuuming, mopping, trash, restrooms, glass, and finished by 6:30, which gave him 30 minutes to get home and 45 minutes of sleep before Marcus needed to be up for school. 45 minutes. Some nights more. He had, by the 7th month, learned the geography of his floors with the intimacy of the overnight worker who moved through a building that others only occupied. He knew which offices smelled like strong coffee and which like old paper. He knew the 47th floor's conference room had a leak in the northeast corner that facilities had been notified about 3 times and had not yet addressed. He knew the executive suite on 16 was the last floor to go dark, because the CEO kept hours that suggested she either loved work with a religious intensity or was using it to avoid going home. He suspected the latter. He knew this not because he'd been told. No one had told him anything about Vivian Cross that the building's day staff shrug hadn't covered, but because he recognized the quality of late-night presence in an office. He had been to enough emergency scenes to know what a person looked like when they were using motion to manage pain. Vivian Cross, seen in the brief and careful glimpses available to a man who had learned to be invisible on her floor, had that quality. She moved through the executive suite with the specific efficiency of someone who had eliminated everything from her life that wasn't strictly necessary, and what remained was work, and she was doing it at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday. He cleaned around her. She did not acknowledge him. He had developed, by the 3rd month, a working theory about what the non-acknowledgement meant. It was not contempt. He had been in enough rooms where contempt was present to recognize its specific texture, the deliberate unseeing that was actually a form of seeing, the performance of absence that required the other person's presence to perform. This was not that. This was something more absolute. She had constructed a field of awareness that stopped at the edge of the operationally necessary, and he was not operationally necessary. He existed in the building the way the HVAC existed in the building, essential to function, not a participant in the work. He was, to his mild surprise, not bothered by this. He had spent 26 months in a world where everything bothered him at some level, not necessarily visibly, not in ways that interrupted the function of his days, but at the level of background noise. The grief was not loud, but it was constant. The way a frequency you can't quite identify is constant, present under everything else. Against that background noise, the non-acknowledgement of a CEO on the 16th floor of a commercial tower was not significant. He had also, in 6 years of emergency medicine, been in many rooms where he was operationally essential and personally invisible. The ER at 2 a.m. with a patient in acute distress and a family in the waiting room was not a room that needed him to be seen. It needed him to be competent and present and unobtrusive. He had been all of those things. He was those things here. He cleaned around her. She did not acknowledge him. He did his job. The first month he did his job with the specific discipline of someone who had arrived in a new position and was mapping the territory before drawing any conclusions. He learned the building. He learned the floors, the systems, the patterns of occupancy and the patterns of absence. He learned that the Cross Capital Partners suite was the last to go dark every night, that the CEO's office light was on a variable schedule that correlated with nothing predictable, not the market calendar, not the week of the month, not the proximity to board meetings. She worked late because she worked late. There was no pattern other than the fact of it. He learned that Lorraine, who arrived every morning at 6:30, had a specific assessment of every person who worked in the building, and that her assessments were accurate in ways that took him a month to verify, and that he then trusted without question. Lorraine's assessment of the building's cleaning crew was, "The overnight guys are fine, Pete runs a good team, don't worry about them." Her assessment of Cross Capital's staff was, "Good people, work hard, the COO is charming and I don't trust him." Her assessment of Vivian Cross was, she was different before, and the wall came after. And neither of those things is my business, and I keep them accordingly. He kept them accordingly too. He cleaned around her on Wednesday and Thursday, and the following Monday and the Monday after that, and she did not acknowledge him on any of those occasions either. She was not rude about it. There was nothing hostile in the non-acknowledgement, nothing that said he was beneath her attention. It was more absolute than rudeness. He was, in the field of her awareness, not present. He had thought about this. He had thought about it the way he thought about things he didn't fully understand. With the patience of a man who had learned in 6 years of emergency medicine that the things you didn't fully understand were usually telling you something if you were quiet enough to hear it. The wall was the thing. The wall she maintained around the executive suite, around herself, around any interaction that wasn't strictly operational. He had seen walls like this before, in the ER, in the aftermath of loss, the specific wall that people built when the cost of being reached by something unexpected had become higher than they were willing to pay. He thought, she is in grief, the particular kind that has gone on long enough to become architecture. He thought, that is her business, not mine. He cleaned the corridor outside her office, and he did not knock, and he moved on. Marcus was the one who started the complication. Marcus was 8 and had his mother's face and his father's disposition toward systems. He liked to understand how things worked, liked the internal logic of processes, liked knowing what came next. He had, for reasons DeShawn could not fully trace, become deeply interested in where his father worked. He asked questions that were specific and architectural. How many floors? How many offices? What kind of mop? What happened to the trash after it left the building? DeShawn answered all of them fully, because Marcus deserved full answers, and because the questions were good ones. In January, Marcus had a school holiday, and DeShawn's mother was sick with a bad cold, and there was no childcare, and DeShawn had to make a decision. He called the building's day supervisor and explained the situation and the supervisor, a man named Pete, who had 2 kids of his own and an uncomplicated view of the relevant ethics, said, "Bring him, keep him in the supply closet on 12. No one's going to notice." Marcus came. He arrived with a backpack, a volcano book from the library, and the specific containment that DeShawn had been cultivating in him since he was small. The understanding that some spaces required a kind of quietness that wasn't the quietness of being afraid, but the quietness of respecting that other people were working. He installed himself in the supply closet on 12 with the competence of a child who had been to enough job sites to understand that the supply closet was the right location and the right posture was invisible. He was invisible for 2 hours. DeShawn moved through floors 12 through 14, checking on him at intervals, and each time he came back, Marcus was in the same position. Book open. Legs folded, perfectly contained. At the end of the 3rd hour, he came back to find the supply closet empty. He did the math of an 8-year-old in a building with 16 floors. He went to the elevator. He pressed 16. He came around the corner to find his son standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite corridor, looking at the mountains. He had been describing those mountains to Marcus for months. The view from 16. The way the city sat in the basin with the range on 3 sides. The way the mountains looked bigger at night against a dark sky. Marcus had come to verify the description. With his backpack and a book about volcanoes that he had checked out from the library specifically because he wanted something to read while waiting, and he was perfectly contained for 2 hours, and then he came to find his father, and in doing so walked, with the complete spatial confidence of a child who had mapped a space in his imagination and was now verifying the map. Directly onto floor 16. DeShawn heard the elevator and came around the corner to find his son standing in the executive suite corridor, looking at the floor-to-ceiling windows with the expression of someone whose mental map and reality have just confirmed each other. "There's the mountains," Marcus said. "I told you," DeShawn said. "They're bigger at night. The lights are off," DeShawn said. "It makes the sky darker. The mountains look bigger against a dark sky." Marcus looked at the view for another 30 seconds. With the considered appreciation of someone taking a landscape reading. Then he looked down the corridor and saw the light under Vivian Cross's office door. "Someone's here," he said. "The CEO, DeShawn said. She works late. Come on. Why does she work late? I don't know, DeShawn said, which was not technically true. Do you talk to her? No, DeShawn said. Marcus looked at him with the expression he got when something didn't make sense in the way things should make sense. Why not? That's not how it works, Marcus. I clean the building. She runs a company. It's not like that. Marcus looked at the light under the door. That seems lonely, he said. He said it with the matter-of-fact directness of an 8-year-old who had lived in a house with a grieving parent for 26 months and understood grief without having a full vocabulary for it yet. DeShawn looked at his son in the corridor outside Vivian Cross's office at 2 a.m. Marcus was not wrong. He was almost never wrong about the things he noticed about people. He had his mother's eyes, not just in color, but in the way they worked, the way they looked at a person and picked up the signal that people spent a lot of effort suppressing. Keisha had been like that. She had looked at people the way a good diagnostician looked at a patient, not for what they were presenting, but for what was underneath the presentation. Marcus had it. He had it at 8 in the way that suggested he would have it at 30, at 50, at whatever age he turned into. The specific perceptiveness of someone who paid attention to people the way his father paid attention to systems. That seems lonely, Marcus said. He said it without drama, without particular weight, as an observation. The way he would say, that cloud looks like a dog, or that bus is running late. Something he had noticed and named. DeShawn stood in the corridor for a moment looking at the light under the door. He thought about Vivian Cross working at 1 a.m. in an empty building that she owned. He thought about what Marcus had said and whether it was true and whether it mattered, and what, if anything, it had to do with him. He thought, none of that is mine. I clean the floor. Come on, he said, and took Marcus back to the supply closet on 12. The hat was a different thing. He found it at the end of the shift, bright red in the corner of the cart. A child's hat and a cart full of industrial cleaning supplies, and he looked at it for a moment with the specific feeling of someone who has forgotten to do a small thing and is deciding when to do it. He would bring it home tomorrow. He told himself that. He did not bring it home tomorrow. The following week, when he was restocking the cart before the shift, the hat was still there, and he thought, I'll take it at the end of tonight. He did not take it at the end of that night either. At some point, he could not identify the specific evening. The not taking it home had stopped being a failure to remember and had become a choice. And the choice was not one he examined directly, but that was present in the way of choices that have been made without being made. The hat stayed on the cart. Who had lived in a house with a grieving parent for 26 months and understood grief without having a full vocabulary for it yet. Come on, DeShawn said, and took his son back to the supply closet on 12. But Marcus left his red winter hat behind. He had taken it off in the elevator. He always took his hat off in elevators. A habit DeShawn didn't fully understand but had stopped questioning, and he had set it on the corner of DeShawn's supply cart and forgotten it there when they went back downstairs. DeShawn found it at the end of the shift, hooked it on the corner of the cart, told himself he'd bring it home tomorrow. He didn't bring it home tomorrow. He brought it the following week, and it wasn't there when Marcus looked for it, and Marcus said he didn't need it anyway, and DeShawn went to put it in the car, and somehow it ended up back on the cart. It stayed on the cart. He didn't think about why. The next 6 weeks established a pattern that DeShawn came to understand as a specific kind of coexistence. Not relationship. Not interaction. Coexistence. The particular arrangement of two people who occupy the same space on a regular basis and have negotiated, without words, the terms of how they do so. Vivian Cross worked late. DeShawn cleaned the floor around her. The office light was on or it was not. He moved quietly when it was on and at his normal efficient pace when it was off. He was good at quiet. 6 years of emergency medicine had taught him the specific skill of moving through a charged space without adding to its charge. The ER quality of presence that was alert and ready and entirely unobtrusive until the moment it needed to be otherwise. He carried the supply cart. The red winter hat was on the corner of it. He noticed the first time she looked at the hat. He was at the supply cart, which was stationed in the corridor outside her office, restocking the cleaning supplies before starting the floor's final pass. She came out of her office the first time in 7 months that her door had opened while he was directly at the cart, and she stopped. She did not look at him. She looked at the hat. It was a red hat, child-sized, with a small white pom-pom on the top. It had a logo on the band that said Denver Nuggets in the faded way of something that had been washed many times. It was, objectively, a very small and very red hat on a cart full of cleaning equipment, and it had absolutely no business being there. She looked at it for approximately 3 seconds. Then she went down the corridor to the coffee station without saying anything. He went back to restocking. The following Tuesday, she came out of her office again. He was at the cart again. He was always at the cart at this hour. This was his routine. And she looked at the hat again. 2 seconds this time. Then the coffee station. The week after, she came out and stopped and looked at the hat, and then, for the first time in 7 months, in the specific history of DeShawn Carter and Vivian Cross, sharing the 16th floor of 1600 Glenarm Place, she spoke to him. "Whose is that?" she said. "My son's," DeShawn said. He forgot it. She looked at the hat. "How old?" 8. She looked at the hat for another moment. Something in her face that he couldn't read fully. It was a partial reading. The kind you got when you only had a second or two of a person's expression in context. Then she went down the corridor to the coffee station without saying anything else. He looked at the hat for a moment after she left. He thought, that was the first time. In 7 months. He went back to work. The conversations, and they were conversations after that, though the word was generous for what they actually were, brief, contained exchanges initiated by her on the subject of the hat or the building or something operational, happened approximately twice a week for the next month. He noticed things about the conversations that he filed without commenting on. The time she asked about the cut on his hand, she had come out of her office with the bandage not immediately, but after a 2-minute pause, which meant she had thought about whether to bring it and had decided yes. The bilateral grip on the mug, which was present on the night she had worked past midnight and absent sometimes, on the night she had come in only for a few hours. He was not tracking her. He was a former empt, and the observation of physical presentation was a reflex he had not unlearned. He noticed that she was more tired in March than she had been in February. Not the tired of overwork, the other kind. The kind that came from managing something that was getting heavier. He didn't know then what Brendan was doing. He knew she was carrying something additional. He noticed that when she asked him questions about Marcus, about his background, about the empt work, she listened in the complete way. Not the half-listening of someone asking a question, because protocol requires a question, but the actual thing. The kind that fed back into the conversation through follow-up specifics that required you to have actually heard the previous answer. She asked once about what Marcus was learning in school. 2 weeks later, she referenced it. "The volcanoes," you said. "Is he still on that?" He was still on that. He told her. She nodded with the small nod of someone updating an internal record. He thought, she is not a cold person. She is a careful person. The difference matters. He thought this and did not say it because it was not his to say. He cleaned the floor. He kept the hat on the cart. Though the word was generous for what they actually were, brief. Contained exchanges initiated by her on the subject of the hat or the building or something operational, happened approximately twice a week for the next month. They were never long. They were never warm exactly, though they were not cold either. They had the quality of a person testing something. Testing whether a small amount of contact was as costly as they'd decided all contact was. He answered what she asked and did not ask questions back. He was not strategic about this. It was simply the ethic of the overnight worker, who was a guest in other people's spaces and behaved accordingly. He was not there to be a conversationalist. He was there to clean the building. But she kept talking. She asked once what his son's name was. "Marcus," he said. She nodded and went back into her office. She asked once, on a night when he'd come in with a cut on his hand from a supply closet door with a broken latch, whether he'd put something on it. He had, he said. She disappeared into her office and came back 2 minutes later with a bandage from what appeared to be a very well-stocked first aid kit that she kept in her desk drawer, which told him something about her that he filed without examining too closely. She asked, one night in February, whether he'd always done this work. No, he said. He waited. She was at the coffee station. She was making tea, not coffee. He had noticed the shift in the past 2 weeks, from the company's machine-made coffee to a specific tea she brought from home in a small canvas bag. "What did you do before?" she said. "I was a paramedic," he said. She looked at him. Not the brief sideways look, a direct one. "Why did you stop?" He thought about how to answer this. He thought about Keisha and the ambulance and the hospital and the specific decision he'd made sitting in his car in the foothills looking at the mountains. "My wife died," he said. "A cardiac event. It changed how I related to the work." She held the tea mug, a white mug, company logo, held in the specific bilateral grip that he had noticed in the second week, the grip of someone who needed both hands to feel steady. She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not the automatic sorry. The other kind. The kind that came from a person who understood what they were sorry about." "Thank you," he said. She went back into her office. He finished the floor. He rode the elevator down and walked to his car in the parking structure and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. He sat in the car in the parking structure. He thought about what he knew and what he could do with it. He was a janitor. He had overheard a conversation from a supply closet. The information was real, and the threat it described was real, and the person it threatened was a CEO who had, until 6 weeks ago, declined to acknowledge his existence. He thought about the specific calculus of this. In emergency medicine, the calculus was simple. You delivered the information to the person who needed it regardless of context, because the cost of not delivering it was a person's health or life. Outside emergency medicine, the calculus was different. People were not in emergencies. Information had politics and consequences, and there were things a night janitor in a building was and was not positioned to do. He thought about the 3 weeks ahead of him before he would be ready to tell her. He would need to build the channel. The channel was not there yet. 4 weeks of corridor conversations was not enough for this. He needed her to trust that what he was bringing her was real, and not the rumor of a man who'd overheard something he shouldn't have. He needed her to hear it as information, not as noise. He thought about Keisha in the ER, about the first visit, when they'd told her it was anxiety, about the second visit when they'd sent her home again, about the third visit, which he had not been with her for, because he had been in the field, and which had been the last one. He thought, the cost of not delivering information is not always visible. Sometimes it is very visible, and it is 26 months old, and it lives in an 8-year-old boy who brings a volcano book to an office building in the middle of the night. He drove home. The mountains were black shapes against the sky. Marcus would be up in 4 hours. He needed to sleep. He thought about the bilateral mug grip. He thought about the 2 hands, the steadiness they were looking for, the specific quality of someone who had learned to manage their own fragility with great care. He thought, she is in grief. Still. 4 years out and still. He thought about what it cost a person to hold the steadiness that long. He drove home. He thought, on that drive, about Lorraine and the wall, about the specific calculation Vivian had made that the price of surviving was no contact with the things that might reach her the way Paul had reached her. He understood the math. He had made a version of it. The overnight shift, the empty building, the work that did not ask him to be present to anyone in crisis. His version had a natural endpoint because Marcus required him to be present. Her version had no such requirement. He thought, she has organized her life so that the wall has no natural endpoint. That is not a failure. That is a choice. That is the choice a person makes when they decide the alternative is not survivable. He thought about all of this and filed it in the category of things that were true about another person and were not his business and were not going to change his job. He drove home. He slept. He got Marcus up for school. He made breakfast and helped with the reading homework and drove Marcus to school and sat in the parking lot watching him go through the door with his backpack and his new winter hat. The replacement. A different red, but the same general idea. He drove to the grocery store. He bought food for 4 days. He went home. He slept 4 hours. He got up and started the next day. That was the shape of the life. He had built it carefully, and it held. He drove home through Denver at 3 in the morning, which was the specific hour when the city was between things, not the nighttime city which had its own energy, and not the morning city which had its own direction. The 3M city was just there, the streets empty and the lights on for no one, and the mountains visible at the western edge of everything, the way they always were. He thought about grief management, about the specific professional literature he'd encountered in 6 years of emergency medicine, not as a patient, as a practitioner who dealt regularly with people in acute grief states and who had done continuing education on psychological first response. He thought about the 2 documented phases of grief that everyone knew, and about the less discussed third phase, which the literature called complicated grief, and which the practitioners in the ER called just grief that had been going on too long without the right intervention. Complicated grief was not about the loss. It was about what the loss had changed. The person who had survived it and had reorganized their life around the loss so thoroughly that the reorganization had become the structure. Not the grief as an experience to move through, but the grief as an architecture to live in. The wall, in Lorraine's vocabulary. The wall that had been built as temporary load-bearing and had become permanent. He knew this template. He had applied a version of it to himself. He had stopped being a paramedic because the paramedic work was the wound, and he had decided the wound needed to close before it could be anything other than a wound. That was his version. Vivian's version was different. Her version was everything that might reach her in the way Paul had reached her, which was everything, which was therefore nothing. The only safe territory was work. Work was safe because work was functional, because it had clear inputs and outputs, because it did not ask to be felt, only executed. He thought, I understand this. I did my own version of it. He thought, mine had a natural endpoint, because Marcus needed a father who was present. Hers doesn't have a natural endpoint. She chose a life that doesn't require her to be present to anyone who would notice if she wasn't. He parked in front of his house. He sat in the car for a moment. He thought, that's not my problem to solve. She chose the wall. Adults get to choose their walls. He went inside. The building had a day supervisor named Pete, as mentioned, and a facility manager named Lorraine, who had been at 1600 Glenarm for 11 years, and who had the institutional memory of the building encoded in her at a level that made her a better source of information than the building's own records. DeShawn liked Lorraine because she was direct, and because she told the truth about things when asked. He asked about Vivian Cross one afternoon when he came in early for a supply inventory. Her husband died, Lorraine said, without preamble, as though she'd been waiting for someone to ask. 4 years ago, Paul Cross fell off a ladder fixing his gutters at their house in Cherry Hills. 44 years old, completely healthy, fell off a ladder. She shook her head. She was different before, they say. The people who've been here long enough to remember. The wall, that came after. DeShawn nodded. She's not a bad person, Lorraine said. She's a person who decided the wall was the price of surviving. He thought about that on the drive home. About the specific calculation. The price of surviving. He had made his own version of it. The empt work. The decision in the foothills. The overnight shift in the supply cart, and the specific economy of a life organized around a child and a manageable job. He had decided the price of surviving was giving up the thing that hurt. She had decided the price was giving up contact with the things that might hurt. Different calculations. Same surviving. He thought, I understand the math. He didn't think about it as a bridge. He didn't think about it as a connection. He thought about it as a structural fact about another person that he now had more context for, and the context changed what the non-acknowledgement had meant, but didn't change what his job was. His job was to clean the building. He cleaned the building. Brendan Vale had been the COO of Cross Capital Partners for 5 years. He was smooth in the way of someone who had decided, early in his career, that smoothness was the relevant professional skill, and had invested accordingly. He was efficient, organized, and had a specific talent for framing situations in ways that made his preferred conclusion seem like the obvious one. He had, in the 8 months since Vivian's last major fund decision had underperformed by a meaningful margin, been quietly building a case. DeShawn learned about him gradually and then all at once. The gradually part started in his first week on the floor. Brendan Vale appeared on 16 with the specific regularity of a senior executive who had found a reason to be present on the executive floor after hours. He walked through with the ease of someone who belonged there, which he did, and with the particular quality of someone who was also observing something, which was less immediately visible. DeShawn noticed it because he had spent 6 years in situations where the surface behavior and the underlying behavior were running on different tracks simultaneously. The ER at 2 in the morning with a patient who said their pain was a 4 and whose body said it was an 8. The family in the waiting room who asked how their mother was doing and meant something more than the clinical answer. He noticed Brendan Vale the way he had noticed those things, not with suspicion, with attention. He filed the attention and moved on. Over the following months, the filed observations accumulated. The quality of the conversations that happened in the conference rooms when the lights were on and the doors were open and the cleaning crew was moving through. The specific tone of Brendan's interactions with the board members who came to the cross-capital floor for in-person meetings, the warmth that was too consistent, the alignment that was too smooth, the way he positioned himself in the frame of every significant conversation without appearing to be doing so. He was good at it. DeShawn gave him that. He was practicing the specific kind of organizational maneuvering that required patience and subtlety and the long game. He was not crude about it. He was not obviously self-serving. He appeared, to anyone not paying the specific quality of attention DeShawn paid to things, to be a competent and loyal executive navigating a difficult moment in the company's history. DeShawn paid the specific quality of attention. The all-at-once part was a Wednesday evening in March, when Brendan Vale stayed late. The gradually part was the texture of the executive suite after hours, the documents that were left out, the conversations that happened in conference rooms where the lights had been left on and the cleaning crew was invisible. The quality of the emails that showed on people's screens when they forgot that the man mopping the corridor could read. DeShawn was not a spy. He did not read documents deliberately. But he was intelligent and observant, and he moved through spaces that people treated as empty, and over 7 months he had a picture. The all-at-once part was a Wednesday evening in March, when Brendan Vale stayed late. Unusually late. The first time DeShawn had seen him on the floor past 10, and made a call in the conference room adjacent to Vivian's office with the door open. DeShawn was in the supply closet at the end of the corridor, not mopping, not making noise, refilling paper towels. The conversation carried clearly. Brendan was speaking to someone on the board. DeShawn got enough to understand the shape. The Hartfield Fund decision, which had underperformed, was being framed not as a legitimate investment miss, the kind that any PE firm had periodically, but as evidence of a pattern. Brendan was describing Vivian's decision-making as increasingly emotional, increasingly disconnected from data, increasingly driven by something other than sound investment judgment. He used the word grief twice, carefully, in a way that was framed as concern and was actually something else entirely. He said, "It may be time to think about a transition." DeShawn finished with the paper towels. He went out to the corridor and began mopping with the ordinary thoroughness that made him invisible. And Brendan Vale, on his call, did not pause. He drove home that morning with the picture complete and with a specific anger that he had not felt in a long time. Not hot, not reactive. The other kind of anger. The cold kind that came from understanding a situation clearly and recognizing it as wrong. He had been a paramedic. He had been in situations where someone was being hurt, and the question was what to do about it. The answer in emergency medicine was always stabilize, protect, address the source. You didn't stand there assessing when there was a wound. He sat in the car in the parking structure and thought about what he knew and what he could do with it. He thought, I am a janitor. I am a janitor who overheard a COO's phone call from a supply closet. He thought about the weight of that, the specific limitation of it. He could not walk into Vivian Cross's office and say, your COO is positioning you out. She did not speak to him. She had been speaking to him for 4 weeks, in the specific small increment way of someone testing a wall. But the conversations were about Marcus's hat, and whether he'd treated a cut on his hand. He thought about Keisha, about the twice the ER sent her home because the presentation was wrong, and the patient was young, and black and the symptoms didn't fit the clinician's prior expectation of what a cardiac emergency looked like. He thought about the cost of information that didn't reach the right person in time. He went home, he slept, he got Marcus up for school, he drove him there and watched him go in through the school door with the backpack and the new winter hat he'd gotten when the red one didn't come home. He thought, I need to tell her. He thought, I don't know how. He spent 2 weeks thinking about how. He continued his work. The floor 16 cleaning routine did not change. The brief corridor conversations with Vivian continued. She asked one evening about Marcus's school. What grade? What was he studying? He told her. She listened with the quality of attention she brought to the hat. Fully present, briefly, then back behind the wall. In the 3rd week, he made his decision. He was finishing the corridor on 16, cart and mop, and the ordinary apparatus of the job, when she came out of her office at 1:15 in the morning with the tired, compressed quality of someone who had been in a difficult meeting until midnight and had kept working after. She went to the coffee station. He continued mopping. She said, without turning from the coffee station, you've been quieter this month. He stopped mopping. I've had something on my mind, he said. She turned slightly. What? He thought about how to do this. He thought about the paramedic in him, about the empt instinct, which was to deliver information that the patient needed regardless of whether they wanted to hear it, because the cost of not delivering it was higher than the cost of the discomfort. I heard something, he said, 3 weeks ago, in the conference room. I was in the supply closet. The door was open and I wasn't trying to listen, but I was there. She turned fully now. Your COO, he said. He was on a call. I think it was with a board member. He was describing your decision on the Hartfield Fund as evidence of something larger than an investment miss. He used the word grief. He said it might be time to think about a transition. The corridor was very quiet. She looked at him with the full attention she rarely deployed, not the sideways brief look, but the direct one, the one she'd given him when he said his wife died. She was processing. He could see it in the stillness that was her processing mode. You're telling me this, she said. Yes, you're a night janitor, she said, not cruelly, as a fact about the situation. I know, he said. Why are you telling me this? He thought about Keisha, about the ER that had sent her home twice, about the cost of information that didn't reach the right person. Because I was in emergency medicine for 6 years, he said. And the thing you learn in emergency medicine is that the information that saves someone usually comes from the person no one expected it to come from. The first responder, the neighbor, the janitor. He paused. You deserve to know. She was quiet for a long time. I've been watching Brendan for 3 months, she said finally. I knew something was wrong. I didn't have specifics. Now you do, he said. She looked at him. The expression that was not easy to read. Not the wall, not the warmth, something in between that was both. What did he say exactly, he told her. Everything he had heard. He told her with the precision of the empt, not interpretation, not editorializing, the words themselves, as accurately as he could recall them. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was still. Hartfield underperformed because the macro environment moved against the thesis, she said. It was a sound investment with a wrong direction macro call. That's different from impaired judgment. I know, he said. He knows that too. Yes, she looked at the corridor, at the mop bucket, the cart, the red hat in the corner of the cart. You've been carrying this for 3 weeks. I needed to figure out how to tell you, he said. Why did it take 3 weeks? He looked at the hat. You don't talk to me, he said. We've been talking for 4 weeks. Before that, 7 months of nothing. I wasn't sure you'd hear it from me. She was quiet again. Something moving through her expression that he didn't try to name. I hear it, she said. Good, he said. She went back into her office. He finished mopping the corridor. At 2:15, she came back out and said, I need to know the date of the call. As specifically as you can. Wednesday, March 11th, he said. Around 10:20. She nodded. She went back in. He finished the floor. He rode the elevator down. He sat in his car in the parking structure. He thought about what he'd done, about whether it was the right thing. He thought, yes. He thought, it was the thing I would have done in the ER. Deliver the information to the person who needs it. Let them decide what to do with it. He thought about the specific quality of being heard by Vivian Cross. She had heard him the way she heard a diagnostic report, fully, for content, without the filter of worry about the person delivering it. She had not looked at him with the careful, pity-adjacent attention he had become accustomed to in 26 months of people being kind to him. She had looked at him as if the information mattered and the person delivering it was competent, and the only relevant question was what to do with the information. It was the most normal he had felt in a professional context since Keisha died. He sat with that for a moment. He thought, she still doesn't talk to the cleaning crew in any general sense. She talks to me. That distinction is recent and specific, and he was not going to examine it too closely. He was going to drive home and sleep 4 hours and get Marcus up for school. About the specific risk of it, if Brendan Vale found out that the night janitor had been in a supply closet and had heard the call and had reported it to Vivian, that was a complication with real consequences. He had a son. He had a job. He had the overnight shift and the supply cart and the specific economy of a life built around both. He thought about Keisha, sent home from the ER twice. He drove home. The week after he told her, everything changed, and nothing changed. The floor 16 cleaning routine was the same. His cart, his mop, his hours. The executive suite corridor at 1:15 in the morning. But the quality of Vivian's presence on the floor was different. She came out of her office more, moved through the space differently, the specific compression of someone managing a new weight alongside the existing ones. He had thought, in the days since the conversation, about what it had cost her to hear it. Not the information itself. She was a CEO. She had been receiving difficult information and acting on it for 12 years. The cost was different from that. The cost was in the channel. She had received it from the night janitor. She had received it from the person she had not spoken to for 7 months and had then been speaking to in small increments for 6 weeks. She had received it from the person she had been deciding, slowly, to let pass the wall. And the thing he had brought with him past the wall was not warmth or presence or connection. It was a threat to everything she had spent 12 years building. He thought about the cost of that, about what it meant to have someone get close enough to bring you the hardest news. He thought, she did not close the wall back up. She kept the door where it was. That was something. That was a significant something. The floor 16 cleaning routine was the same. His cart, his mop, his hours, the executive suite corridor at 1:15 in the morning. But the quality of Vivian's presence on the floor was different. She came out of her office more, moved through the space differently, the specific compression of someone managing a new weight alongside the existing ones. She did not avoid him. That was the notable thing. Some people, after receiving difficult information, retreated from the person who had delivered it, a kind of transferred discomfort, the messenger and the message becoming the same thing. She did the opposite. She came to the corridor more often than she had before, and the conversations, still brief, still contained, had a different quality, a different frequency. She asked him, on a Tuesday in late March, about Marcus. Not just the name and grade, she asked about him specifically. What did he like? How was he doing in school? What was the book about volcanoes about? She'd seen it in his bag that one night. DeShawn answered, and there was something in answering, in talking about Marcus to someone who was asking with the real interest, not the performed kind, that he hadn't experienced in a long time. He said, he's obsessed with natural systems. Volcanoes, tectonic plates, weather patterns. He wants to understand why things happen on large scales. She said, that's a specific kind of mind. He said, yes. She was at the coffee station. She was not making coffee. She was holding the mug in the bilateral grip and looking at the window, at the Denver night, at the mountains that Marcus had said looked bigger in the dark. My husband was like that, she said. He was a civil engineer. He thought about things at large scales, river systems, load distributions. He used to say that if you understood the forces, the structure took care of itself. She said it the way people said things they had been carrying, not weightlessly, not dramatically, but with the specific care of something brought out from a place it was usually kept. What was his name? DeShawn said. Paul, she said. She said it simply, without the weight that names of the dead usually carried, not because the weight wasn't there, but because she was carrying it instead of putting it in the word. He died 4 years ago. I know, DeShawn said. Lorraine told me. She looked at him. What did Lorraine tell you? That he fell. That you were different before and the wall came after. She was quiet. He thought he might have gone too far, that the specific honesty of it would close the conversation the way a door closes. But she looked at the mug and then at the mountains and she said, That's accurate. I'm sorry, he said. The same kind of sorry he'd heard from her. The kind that knew what it was sorry about. Thank you, she said. She went back into her office. He finished the floor. He drove home. He made Marcus breakfast and drove him to school and came home and slept. When he woke up, there was a message from a number he didn't recognize. This is Vivian Cross. I got your number from building HR. I want to meet. Not here. Coffee at Crema on Saturday morning at 9, if that works for you. He looked at the message for a moment. He typed, Yes, that works. The coffee was different from the corridor. The corridor had the specific topology of their arrangement. He was the janitor, she was the CEO, and even in conversations that exceeded those parameters, the parameters were always there as the floor they stood on. The coffee shop was neutral ground, different floor entirely. She was already there when he arrived. At a corner table with a mug she was holding, he noted, with one hand, by the handle, the regular grip. The public version, the managed version. He sat down and she asked how he took his coffee, and he said black, and she ordered it, and they sat with the specific awkwardness of two people who had developed a working relationship in an unusual context and were now in a normal one for the first time. He sat down. She looked at him across the table with the direct look, not the sideways one. Outside the building, in the morning light, she looked different, not less formidable, not softer, but present in a different way. The building lent everyone in it a specific institutional weight that was useful for certain things and that removed other things. Outside the building, she was just a person. He thought he preferred her this way. He thought she might too, though he couldn't be sure. She asked how he took his coffee and he said black and she ordered it. She had already ordered hers, a flat white, not the tea she'd been bringing from home. He noted this the way he noted most things about her, without comment for the record. She said, I want to talk about Brendan. Okay, he said. I've been tracking his activity for 2 weeks since you told me. He's been building the file for 8 months. The Hartfield call was the last piece. He was looking for something to frame as a pattern, and when the fund underperformed, he had it. She paused. I've also been tracking his earlier decisions. There are 3 situations in the past year where he drafted communications in my name that did not reflect my position. He sent them to board members. The board believes they came from me. He's manufacturing a record, DeShawn said. Yes, and the record will say, the CEO made these decisions, and these decisions were impaired, and the COO documented his concerns over a sustained period. She paused. It's a good plan. What's the counter? She looked at her mug. The counter is a new initiative, something large enough and clearly enough mine that the board has to weigh the plan against the demonstrated vision, something that makes the impaired judgment narrative structurally incompatible with observable reality. He thought about this. He thought about what he knew about the company, what he'd absorbed in 7 months of moving through its spaces, reading what was visible, listening to what carried. The impact investment market, he said. Cross Capital has never played there. The returns are below the fund's target threshold. She looked at him. But the risk profile is different, he said, and the LP base is moving. 3 of your major institutional LPs have made public commitments to impact allocation in their last 2 annual reports. If Cross Capital had a dedicated impact vehicle, you'd capture that capital before anyone else in the Denver market does. She was still for a long moment. How do you know about LP annual reports? I worked for an MT company that had a public pension fund as its primary client, he said. I know how institutional capital thinks about social mandate. She looked at him for a moment with the recalibration expression. The specific look of someone whose model is being updated in real time. He thought, she is good at updating the model. That is what makes her good at running a fund. The ability to accept information that doesn't fit the prior category and integrate it rather than file it as noise. He thought, she has been updating her model of me for 3 months. The first update was the hat, then the empt comment, then the Brendan information. Now this. Each update has required her to revise the category downward toward, this person is more than the category I put him in. That is a specific and sometimes difficult thing to do. She was doing it without apparent difficulty. He thought, that is who she is. That is the part of her that the wall doesn't touch. She can still update the model. The wall keeps out the feeling, but the thinking is intact. She looked at him. The direct look. You're a paramedic and an EMP company operations manager, and now a janitor who is telling me about impact investment market positioning. I'm a person who paid attention to where I worked, he said. She looked at the mug. She looked at the mountains, visible through the coffee shop window in the Saturday morning light, visible and less dramatic than they were at night. But there. Real. Specific. Cross Forward, she said. That was the name I'd been turning over. For a social impact vehicle. Cross Forward. That's a good name, he said. I need an operations advisor, she said. Someone who can help me structure the community partnership component. The impact investment mandate requires community partner relationships. I don't have them. She paused. You've spent 7 months in this building. You know Denver's civic infrastructure at the ground level in a way that no one on my team does. He thought about Marcus and school clothes and the night differential and the 45 minutes of sleep before the morning. He thought about Keisha and the MT work and the foothills and the decision he'd made in his car looking at the mountains. He thought about the information that saves someone and where it usually comes from. Tell me what it pays, he said. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll need to keep the building job for the first month, until the consulting contract is established. I'll make the consulting contract worth establishing quickly, she said. Then yes, he said. Marcus was at the coffee shop with him. He'd brought Marcus because Saturday morning was the morning they did things together, and he hadn't wanted to change that. And Marcus had been at the corner table eating a croissant and listening to them talk with the specific invisible patience he'd inherited from his father. After the yes, Vivian looked at Marcus. Hi, she said. Hi, Marcus said. You left your hat at the building, she said. Marcus looked at his father. I left it on the cart, he said. I know. Vivian said. Your dad keeps it there. Marcus looked at his father with the expression of someone who has just received a small piece of information about a person that reorganizes their understanding of that person. DeShawn looked at the window. Why? Marcus said. DeShawn was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. It seemed right. Marcus nodded with the nod of a child deciding to accept an answer that isn't fully an answer, because some answers came later. Okay, he said. He went back to the croissant. Vivian Cross looked at the red winter hat that Marcus was wearing. The new one, the replacement, a different red, but the same general category of winter hat. She looked at it for a moment with the expression that was not the wall and was not the warmth, but was something moving between them. Then she looked at DeShawn. He looked at the window. He thought, something is changing here. He did not name it. He was a man who trusted the pattern and let the conclusion emerge. The morning of April 9th started at 4:47, like every morning. DeShawn was on floor 16, final pass of the night, cart and mop in the specific rhythm he could have done in his sleep, because he had done it nearly in his sleep on the nights when the 45 minutes hadn't been enough. He was mopping the executive suite corridor when he heard the sound. Not the sound of a building settling. Not the schvack. Something that did not belong in an empty building at 4:47 in the morning. He cataloged it in the 2 seconds of stillness before he moved. In 6 years of emergency medicine, he had learned the specific skill of assessing a situation from a distance before entering it. Not hesitation, the opposite. The focused speed of someone who understood that the first seconds of assessment determined everything that followed. He cataloged. A sound from a closed room, low. Not a word. Not a deliberate call. Something involuntary. Something a body made when the body's management of itself had temporarily failed. He was at the door before he had consciously decided to move. He knocked. He knocked again. Louder. Miss? Cross? It's DeShawn. Are you all right? No answer. But the sound again, not a call, not a word. Something less formed than that. He opened the door. She was on the floor behind the desk. He read the position in the first half second. Not a fall, not a loss of consciousness, not the collapsed posture of someone who had lost the fight. She had slid, controlled, involuntary. The specific movement of a body making a decision faster than the mind could override it. She was on her side, which was correct for the symptoms he was already assessing. Skin color, breathing quality. The way her left hand moved against the carpet. He was across the room. He had not done this in 26 months. He had been a janitor for 7 months. He had a supply cart in the corridor and a red winter hat on its corner and a son who would be up in 3 hours. None of that was in the room with him. What was in the room was his training, the 6 years of it, and a woman on the floor. And the principle he had learned in the first week of M School: you assess, you act, you do not stop to think about whether you are the right person. The right person is the person who is there. He was there. He checked her airway. He checked her pulse, fast, irregular, the specific irregularity he knew. The one that was not anxiety and not panic and was the cardiac system doing something it was not supposed to do. He put down the mop. The sound was from Vivian's office. Her office light was on. She had been there when he arrived. The same as every night. The light under the door, the last one on the floor. He had assumed she would leave before he finished, the way she usually left before he finished now, that the Brendan situation had given her reason to be more careful about her hours, more protective of her visible presence in the building. He went to the office door. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Louder, miss? Cross? It's DeShawn. Are you all right? No answer. But the sound again. Not a call, not a word. Something less formed than that. He opened the door. She was on the floor behind the desk. Not a fall. She had slid. He understood immediately from the body's position. From the chair to the floor, in the specific involuntary way of someone whose body had overridden their intention. She was conscious, barely. Her breathing was wrong, fast, shallow. The specific quality that every EMT recognized as a system under acute stress. He was across the room in 4 steps. He was a former EMT. He had been out of active service for 26 months. The protocol came back with the absolute completeness of something trained into muscle memory, assessment, airway, pulse, presentation. Call, he assessed. He checked her pulse, fast, irregular, not the regular irregularity of panic, the other kind. He looked at her face, her color, her eyes. He called 911. He told the dispatcher what he had: a 42-year-old female, conscious but impaired, irregular pulse, labored breathing, possible cardiac event. He gave the address, the floor, the suite. He stayed on the line. He stayed with her. She looked at him. She was not fully present. She was somewhere between conscious and the other place, the specific borderland he had spent 6 years navigating. But she looked at him. "Hey," he said. "I've got you. I'm here. You're going to be okay." He said it the way he had said it to hundreds of people in hundreds of emergency situations before Keisha died. He said it with the specific certainty of someone who had no ability to promise the outcome, but was promising the presence. I am here. I am not leaving. Whatever happens next happens with someone beside you. She looked at him, and her hand moved. Not reaching, not grasping, just a small movement toward him. He took her hand. He was a janitor in an empty office building in Denver at 4:47 in the morning, with a woman's hand in his and the 911 dispatcher in his ear, and 26 months of not doing this work behind him. He was also a paramedic. Both things were true. Both things were in the room. "You're going to be okay," he said again. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. He gave them the handoff with the specific competence of someone who knew how. Vitals, timeline, presentation, his assessment. They looked at him with the professional recognition of colleagues. One of them said, "You EMT?" He said, "I was." The paramedic nodded and they moved. He stood in the doorway of the office and watched them work and thought about Keisha. about the hospital he'd driven his ambulance to, about 26 months of keeping the paramedic at a specific distance from the rest of his life. He thought it was still there. It came back when it needed to. He was not sure how he felt about that. He was sure it had needed to. Vivian Cross was taken to Denver Health. Cardiac arrhythmia, stress-induced, compounded by a pre-existing mitral valve condition that had not been diagnosed. The condition was treatable. She was not in danger by the time the paramedics reached the hospital. She would need a procedure, monitoring, medication adjustments. She would be fine. DeShawn drove home in the early morning light. He made Marcus breakfast. He drove Marcus to school. He came home and he lay on his bed and he looked at the ceiling and he thought about the morning, about the 6 minutes, about the hand in his and the words he had said. He thought about Keisha. He cried for the first time in 8 months. Not the private, efficient crying he did sometimes at night. The other kind. The unmanaged kind. The kind that meant something was moving through him that had been waiting for the right moment to move. He lay on his bed for 2 hours. Then he got up. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He thought, I was there. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Vivian Cross was in the hospital for 4 days. On the second day, she sent him a message. I hear you called it correctly. Her number, from the previous message. Thank you. And then after a pause of 20 minutes, I'm told you gave the handoff with full clinical competency. You didn't tell me that part was still there. He wrote back, I didn't know it was until it needed to be. She sent. I want you to know what that means. He didn't respond, because he knew what it meant, and the knowing didn't require the words. She came back to the office 2 weeks later. Different, not dramatically, not visibly to most people, but different in the way that a person is different after a system has been tested to failure and repaired. There was something in how she moved through the building. Something about the wall, it was there, but it was a different wall now. Thinner, more chosen. The difference between a wall built in panic and a wall built with full information about why you need a wall. The first day back, she had a board meeting in the morning and a cross-forward planning session in the afternoon, and she did not come to floor 16 until 2 in the morning, which was later than usual, but was also... She came. She came back to the floor. She didn't need to be there. The floor was clean. She came because the floor was where certain conversations happened, and she had something to say. He was there. He was always there. She stood in the corridor and said the things she said. About the wall, about the 4 years, about the hat and the supply closet, and the coffee and the showing up, and he answered what he answered. And there was a moment in the middle of it when she said the thing about him being a paramedic. The way she said it the second time, not as a job history, but as a thing about him, as an understanding of what he was. You show up. You stay. That's what you are. He stood in the corridor with his mop and his cart and the red winter hat on the corner. He stood in the specific place he had stood 400 times in 7 months. He thought, she is right about that. That is what I am. He thought. Keisha knew that. Keisha knew it before he did. She had known it the morning she handed him the folding ruler and said, You're going to be excellent at this. Not the engineering, not the empt work. At whatever it was she could see in him that he couldn't see yet. He thought, she has been gone 26 months and she was right about this, and I did not know it until a woman in a corridor in Denver at 2 in the morning told me. He looked at Vivian. He thought, she is also right. About something that is not the paramedic thing. About the room. About being in the right rooms. He looked at the cart. At the hat. I'll be there, he said. Different, not dramatically, not visibly to most people, but different in the way that a person is different after a system has been tested to failure and repaired. There was something in how she moved through the building. Something about the wall. It was there, but it was a different wall now. Thinner, more chosen. She came to the floor at 2 in the morning on her first night back. He was there, cart and mop, the routine unchanged. She stood in the corridor for a moment. She stood in the corridor and looked at him with the direct look. The one she used when she was saying something she had been building toward. He waited. I left the wall up for 4 years, she said. without preamble, without context, in the way she said the things she had been building toward. Because I decided it was the price. And then you just decided not to pay the price on my behalf. You knocked on the door anyway. I heard a sound that didn't belong, he said. Before that, she said, the hat, the supply closet, the coffee. You kept showing up. He looked at the cart, at the red winter hat on the corner, still there, still the original one, still Nuggets logo faded and pom-pom topped and completely out of place. Marcus forgot it, he said. I know, she said. But you kept it. He was quiet. Why, she said. Not the way she'd asked the first time, more direct, more specific, asking the question she actually wanted the answer to. He thought about it, about what the honest answer was. He thought about the 7 months and the wall and the bilateral mug grip and the word grief said twice in a phone call he shouldn't have heard. He thought about a person who had decided that the price of surviving was not being reached, and about the hat on the corner of the cart that was a small red thing and did not move and did not make demands and was just there every night. I think I wanted you to know there was something small and harmless that wasn't going anywhere, he said, even if you didn't look at it. She was very still. You're a paramedic, she said. I was. You're a paramedic, she said again. Differently, not the job history, the thing about him, the thing about the way he moved through the world. You show up. You stay. She stopped. That's what you are. He looked at her, the direct look, the one he didn't use carelessly. Yes, he said. She looked at the hat, at the cart, at the corridor around them, the floor he had cleaned 400 nights. The cross-forward proposal, she said. I'm presenting it to the board in 3 weeks. I want you there. As what? He said. As the person who built the community partnership framework, she said. As the operations advisor. She paused. As the person who should be in the room. He thought about Marcus, who deserved a father who was in the right rooms. He thought about Keisha, who had always known what rooms he belonged in, sometimes before he did. I'll be there, he said. This is not a story about a janitor who was secretly worth more than his job title. His job title was fine. There is nothing about a night janitor that needs to be secretly more than it is. He cleaned floors. He cleaned them well. He cared about the quality of the work, because he was a person who cared about the quality of his work, and that was a full and complete thing, not a waiting room for something better. But it is a story about what gets missed when we decide that certain people are not worth speaking to. Vivian Cross had a wall. The wall was not irrational. It was the calculated cost of surviving a grief that had arrived without warning and had threatened to take everything. The wall kept her functional. The wall let her run a company and make decisions and get through days that without the wall might have been impossible. The wall was not a failure. The wall was engineering. But engineering has a cost, and the cost of the wall was this. It kept out the things that hurt and also the things that healed, and after 4 years she had built something that was structurally sound and inhabited entirely alone. DeShawn Carter was not a knight. He was not a savior. He was a man who showed up every night and cleaned a floor and did not perform his humanity for anyone's benefit, and who had, in 6 years of emergency medicine, learned that the difference between someone surviving and not surviving was often not the quality of the care, but the speed of the recognition. The moment when someone looked at the situation clearly and said, "This is not right. Something is wrong here. I need to act." He had acted. Not heroically. Professionally, with the competence he had carried in his body for 6 years and had never lost, even when he thought he'd put it down. Brendan Vale resigned from Cross Capital Partners 6 weeks after the board meeting at which the cross-forward proposal was approved unanimously. His resignation was not voluntary in any meaningful sense, though it was formally presented as such. The board's investigation into the misattributed communications was quiet and thorough and reached the conclusion it needed to reach. 3 board members wrote Vivian personal notes afterward. Francis Alderman said, "We should have seen it sooner." Cross Forward launched in the fall. The board meeting in which the proposal was approved had been, by any external measure, an ordinary board meeting. The minutes would reflect strategic initiative presented, discussed, approved with conditions. The minutes would not reflect what DeShawn had seen in the room, the quality of Vivian's presentation, which was different from what he imagined her board presentations usually were. Not more polished, more present. She had presented Cross forward as if it mattered to her, not just as a strategic response to a threat, but as a thing she actually wanted to build. The two were true simultaneously. The board, which had been prepared with the Brendan subtext by the three members Vivian had briefed, understood what they were seeing. A CEO who was fully there, making a case she believed in. Brendan had been in the room. He had asked 3 good questions and said 2 supportive things, and had been, for the duration of the meeting, a model COO attending a strategic initiative presentation. He was good at his job right up until the point where he was no longer doing it. After the meeting in the cross-capital corridor, Vivian had found DeShawn at his cart and said, with no preamble, in the way she said things she had been building toward, it passed. 8-1. He had said, "Who was the one?" She had said, "Brendan." He had said yes. She had said yes. And then she had gone back into her office and closed the door. That had been September. By November, Brendan Vale had resigned. The specifics were not public and were not his to know. What was visible from where he stood, which was the 16th floor 3 nights a week, was that the COO office was empty, and the floor had a different quality of working atmosphere, lighter in a way that was not about the air, but about something in the people. The pressure had changed. The specific weight of having a colleague running a long con against the company's leadership was a weight everyone felt, even when they didn't know what to name it. When the weight was gone, the room breathed differently. Vivian breathed differently, not visibly, not in ways that would appear in any account of her leadership. She was still precise, still demanding, still the CEO who ran her company with the specific intensity of someone who had built it from nothing and understood what it required to keep it. But the wall was different. The wall had windows. He had seen, over the weeks since she came back from the hospital, the wall developing the specific texture of a structure that was still load-bearing, but was no longer trying to be airtight. He thought, that is what recovery looks like. Not the absence of the wall with windows. Cross Forward launched in the fall. Its first fund was $180 million, below the target threshold by design, because impact investment at that scale required a different due diligence infrastructure than the fund's existing portfolio, and DeShawn had spent 4 months building that infrastructure from the ground up. City by city, community partner by community partner. The fund closed its first investment in January, a Denver-based healthcare access nonprofit that was building a mobile health clinic program for communities in the metro area's southeast corridor. DeShawn saw the first clinic van on a Tuesday morning on his way to take Marcus to school. He pulled over. He sat in the car for a moment looking at the van with the Cross Forward logo on the side and the clinic name and the phone number and the small print that said, "Serving Denver's southeast communities." He thought about Keisha. He thought, she would have said you had to make something good from it. She would have said it in the specific way she said everything, directly and without drama. And then she would have made breakfast. He texted Marcus a picture of the van. Marcus wrote back, "Dad, that's your logo." He wrote back, "It's ours." He sat in the car for another few minutes. Not because he needed to, because sitting in the car for a few minutes and looking at something you had helped make was one of the specific small pleasures available to a person whose life had, in the past 7 months, gotten larger in ways he had not planned for. He thought about what he would have told himself 8 months ago, sitting in his car outside a commercial tower in downtown Denver, reading the job listing for an overnight janitor position and deciding whether to apply. He would not have been able to tell himself anything useful. He would not have believed it. That was fine. Some things you had to show up for before they made sense. That was the thing about showing up. It didn't require advanced understanding. It required the showing. He started the car. He drove to Marcus's school. He sat in the pickup line with the other parents. In the specific companionship of the pickup line, which was not a conversation but was a shared location and therefore a kind of presence. Marcus got in the car. He looked at his father. "You're in a good mood," he said. "Yes," DeShawn said. Did something happen? He thought about how to explain the cross-forward clinic van and the Keisha thought and the sitting in the car for a few minutes. He thought about what Marcus would understand at 8 and what he would understand later and what things were worth trying to explain now versus leaving for later. "I saw a van," he said, "with the cross-forward logo, the one we helped build." Marcus processed this. A real van? On the street? On Colfax. Outside the clinic. Marcus thought about this with the consideration he brought to things that had weight. "Mom would have said that's a good van," he said. DeShawn looked at his son. "She would have said, that van is going to help people who need it," Marcus said. "She would have said that in a way that meant she was proud of you, without saying she was proud of you." He thought about Keisha, about the specific way she had said things, directly without excess, meaning more than the words because she didn't waste words on decoration. He thought about Marcus at 8 having his mother's instincts and his father's patience, and the specific perceptiveness of a child who had been paying attention to people since before he had the vocabulary for what he was noticing. "Yes," DeShawn said. "That's exactly how she would have said it." They drove home. He wrote back, "It's ours. The red winter hat is still on the cart." DeShawn still works the overnight shift 3 nights a week. He reduced from 5 when the consulting contract became full-time, but the building is his. He built the map of it in 7 months of 2M cleaning runs, and it doesn't stop being his because his job title changed. Pete keeps a spot for him. Lorraine, who knows everything about the building, including things that happened long before and will keep happening long after, says, "Some people are a building's people." He's one. Marcus came to the building once more after that first time. Not the supply closet. Not the hovering near the CEO's office kind of coming. Properly, during the day, for the cross-forward launch event in September. He wore the new red hat. He stood in the atrium of 1600 Glenarm with a glass of sparkling water that he had accepted from a passing server with the composure of someone attending the kind of event he planned to attend regularly. Vivian found him near the windows, looking at the mountains. "They're smaller in the daytime," he said. "Your dad told me that," she said. "He was right," Marcus said. "But they're still there." She looked at the mountains for a moment. At Denver in the September light, the specific clarity of a high-altitude morning, the mountains real and there and the same as they had always been. "Yes," she said. "They're still there." She handed him back the folded program for the launch event. He looked at it, at the cross-forward logo, at the fund mission statement on the inside, at his father's name and the community partnership's acknowledgement. "He's good at this," Marcus said. "Yes," she said. "He is. He's good at a lot of things," Marcus said. She looked at the program. She looked at Marcus. Something in her expression that was the open one, the one that had been opening, slowly, since the morning in the corridor when a boy left a red hat on a cart. "Yes," she said. "I know." She knew. She had always been going to know. It just needed someone to keep showing up until the knowing was possible. Until the wall was the kind of wall that had a door. Until the door was open and someone who showed up was standing in it. DeShawn Carter showed up. He always had. He always would. There was a morning in February, 4 months after the cross-forward launch, when he was at the building at 3 in the morning. The regular shift. The regular floor. And the floor was empty, and the building was quiet, and he was at his cart doing the supply restock that he did every night at this point in the rotation. The red winter hat was on the corner of the cart. He had been meaning for months to take it home, and he kept not taking it home. It had been on the cart for 11 months. He looked at the hat for a moment. He thought about Marcus asking why the first time, at the Saturday morning coffee shop. He thought about the answer he had given, which was not quite the full answer, but was the true one, it seemed right. He thought about what the full answer was, and whether he could say it now to himself even if he wouldn't have said it then. The full answer was this. He had kept the hat on the cart because it was a small red thing that did not make demands. It sat on the corner of the cart, and it was bright, and it was there, and it was harmless, and it didn't ask for anything. He had thought, without knowing he was thinking it, That a person who had decided that the wall was the only safe structure might eventually notice a thing that was just there. Not insisting, not requiring, just present in the way of things that had been put somewhere and had stayed. He had been right. She had noticed it. It had been the first thing she spoke to him about. "Whose is that?" And he had said, "My son's." And she had asked, "How old?" And the wall had started in its specific way to develop windows. He picked up the hat. He looked at it. The Denver Nuggets logo faded from 11 months of hanging in a corridor with the cleaning supplies. The white pom-pom slightly compressed from the way it had rested against the card edge. He put it back. He thought, "It belongs here. It has been here long enough that this is its place." He went back to the supply restock. In the morning, when he left, he passed the building's lobby and looked up at the cross-forward promotional display that the building management had put in the lobby the week of the launch, and that was still there, 4 months later. Because nobody had told them to take it down, and it looked professional, and it made the building look like it housed something worth being near. The display said, "Cross-forward. Community-centered capital. Investing where it matters. Denver-based. Community-rooted." He read it every morning when he left. He read it the same way every morning. He read it the way you read something you had a part in building, not surprised by it, not needing it to be different, just checking that it was still there, making sure it held. It held. DeShawn Carter showed up. He always had. He always would.